Namaskara to all of my story lovers. Welcome back in Storytime channel. I'm Pallavi reading interesting stories for you. Today I'm reading The Kabuliwallah, the famous story written by the Ravindranath Tagore. Today I am very excited. Now let's go to the story. My 5-year-old daughter, Minnie, cannot live without chattering. I really believe that in all her life she has not wasted a minute in silence. Her mother is often angry because of this and would stop her prattle, but I would not. To see Minnie quiet is unnatural, and I cannot bear it long. And so my own talk with her is always lively. One morning, for instance, when I was in the midst of the 17th chapter of my new novel, my little Minnie stole into the room and putting her hand into mine and said, "Father, Ramdayal, the doorkeeper calls a crow a crow. He doesn't know anything, does he?" Before I could explain to her the difference of language in this world, she had already brought another subject. "What do you think, father? Bhola says there is an elephant in the clouds, blowing water out of his trunk, and that is why it rains." And then, darting off anew, while I sat still thinking of some reply to this last, saying, "Father, how is mother related to you?" "My dear little sister in the law," I murmur involuntarily to myself, but with a grave face, contrary to answer. "Go and play with Bhola, Minnie. I am busy." The window of my room overlooks the road. The child had seated herself at my feet near my table and was playing softly, drumming on her knees. I was hard at work on my 17th chapter, where Pratap Singh, the hero, had just caught Kanchanlata, the heroine, in his arms and was about to escape with her by the third story window of the castle, when all of a sudden Minnie left her play and ran to the window, crying, "Hey Kabuliwala! Hey Kabuliwala!" Sure enough, in the street below was a Kabuliwala, passing slowly along. He wore the loose soiled clothing of his people with a big turban. There was a bag on his back and he carried boxes of grapes in his hand. I cannot tell what my daughter's feeling at the sight of this man were, but she began to call him loudly. "Oh, I thought he will come in and my 17th chapter will never be finished." At that exact moment, the Kabuliwala turned and looked up at the child. When she saw this, overcome by terror, she fled to her mother's protection and disappeared. She had a blind belief that inside the bag which the big man carried there were perhaps 2 or 3 other children like herself. The peddler meanwhile entered my doorway and greeted me with a smiling face. So precious was the position of my hero and my heroine that my first impulse was to stop and buy something, since the man had been called. I made some small purchases and a conversation began about Abdur Rahman, the Russians, the English, and the frontier policy. As he was about to leave, he asked, "And where is the little girl, sir?" and I, thinking that Minnie must get rid of her false fear, had her brought out. She stood by my chair and looked at the kabuliwallah and his bag. He offered her nuts and raisins, but she would not be tempted, and only clung closer to me with all her doubts increased. This was their first meeting. One morning, however, not many days later, as I was leaving the house, I was startled to find Minnie seated on a bench near the door, laughing and talking with a great kabuliwala at her feet. In all her life, it appeared, my small daughter had never found so patient a listener, save her father, and already the corner of her little sari was stuffed with almonds and raisins, the gift of her visitor. "Why did you give her those?" I asked, and taking out an 8 anna bit, I handed it to him. The man accepted the money without demur and slipped it into his pocket. Alas, on my return an hour later, I found the unfortunate coin had made twice its own worth of trouble, for the kabuliwala had given it to Minnie, and her mother, catching sight of the bright round object, had pounced on the child with, "Where did you get that Chana bit?" "The kabuliwala gave it to me," said Minnie cheerfully. "The kabuliwala gave it to you?" cried her mother, shocked. "Oh, Minnie, how could you take it from him?" I, entering at the moment, saved her from impending disaster and proceeded to make my own inquiries. It was not the first or second time I found that the two had met. The kabuliwala had overcome the child's first terror by a judicious berry of nuts and almonds, and the two were now great friends. They had many quaint jokes which offered them much amusement. Seated in front of him, looking down on his gigantic frame in all her tiny dignity, Minnie would ripple her face with laughter and begin, "Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala, what have you got in your bag?" And he would reply in the nasal accent of the mountaineer, "An elephant." Not much cause for merriment, perhaps, but how they both enjoyed the witticism. And for me, this child talk with a grown up man had always in it something strangely fascinating. Then the kabuliwala, not to be behind, would take his turn. "Well, little one, and when are you going to the father-in-law's house?" Now most small Bengali maidens have heard long ago about the father-in-law's house, but we, begin a little new-fangled, had kept these things from our child, and Minnie at this question must have been a trifle bewildered. But she would not show it, and with ready tact replied, "Are you going there?" Amongst men of the Kabuliwala's class, however, it is well known that the words father-in-law's house have a double meaning. It is an euphemism for jail, the place where we all well care for, at no expense to ourselves. In this sense would the sturdy peddler take my daughter's question. "Ah," he would say, shaking his fist at an invisible policeman, "I will thrash my father-in-law." Hearing this, and picturing the poor, discomfited relative, Minnie would go off into peals of laughter, in which her formidable friend would join. These were autumn morning, the very time of year when kings of old went forth to conquest, and I never stirring from my little corner in Calcutta would let my mind wander over the whole world. At the very name of another country, my heart would go out to it, and at the sight of foreigner in the streets, I would fall to weaving a network of dreams. The mountains, the glens, and the forests of his distant home, with his cottage in its setting, and the free and the independent life of faraway wilds. Perhaps the scenes of travel conjure themselves up before me and pass and repass in my imagination all more vividly, because I led such a vegetable existence that a call to travel would fall upon me like a thunderbolt. In the presence of this kabuliwallah, I was immediately transported to the foot of arid mountain peaks, with narrow little defiles twisting in and out amongst their towering heights. I could see the string of camels bearing the merchandise and the company of turbaned merchants carrying some of their queer old firearms and some of their spares journeying downward towards the plains. I could see, but at some such point Minnie's mother would intervene, imploring me to beware of that man. Minnie's mother is unfortunately a very timid lady. Whenever she hears a noise in the street or sees people coming towards the house, she always jumps to the conclusion that they are either thieves or drunkards or snakes or tigers or malaria or cockroaches or caterpillars or an English sailor. Even after all these years of experience, she is not able to overcome her terror. So she was full of doubts about the Kabuliwala and used to beg me to keep a watchful eye on him. I tried to laugh her fear gently away, but then she would turn around on me seriously and ask me solemn questions. Were children never kidnapped? Was it then not true that there was slavery in Kabul? Was it so very absurd that this big man should be able to carry off a tiny child? I urged that, though not impossible, it was highly improbable. But this was not enough, and her dread persisted. As it was indefinite, however, it did not seem right to forbid the man to come to the house, and the intimacy grew unchecked. Once a year, in the middle of January, Rahmoon, the Kabuliwala, was in the habit of returning to his country, and as the time approached, he would be very busy going from house to house collecting his debts. This year, however, he could always find time to come and see Minnie. It would have seemed to an outsider that there was some conspiracy between the two, for when he could not come in the morning, he would appear in the evening. Even to me it was a little startling now and then in the corner of dark room, suddenly to see this tall, loose, garmented man. But when Meenie would run in smiling with her, "Oh Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala," and the two friends, so far apart in age, would subside into their old daughter and their old jokes, I felt reassured. One morning, a few days before he had made up his mind to go, I was correcting my proof sheets in my study. It was chilly weather. Through the window, the rays of the sun touched my feet, and the slight warmth was very welcome. It was almost 8 o'clock, and the early pedestrians were returning home with their heads covered. All at once I heard an uproar in the street, and looking out, saw Rahman being led away, bound between the two policemen, and behind them a crowd of curious boys. There were bloodstains on the clothes of the kabuliwallah, and one of the policemen carried a knife. Hurrying out, I stopped them and inquired what it all meant. Partly from one, partly from another, I gathered that a certain neighbor had owed the peddler something for a Rampuri shawl, but had falsely denied having bought it, and that in the course of a quarrel Rahman had struck him. Now, in the heat of his excitement, the prisoner began calling his enemy all sorts of names, when suddenly in the veranda of my house appeared my little Minnie, with her usual exclamation, "Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala!" Rahman's face lighted up as he turned to her. He had no bag under his arm today, so he could not discuss the elephant with him. She at once therefore proceeded to the next question. "Are you going to the father-in-law's house?" Rahman laughed and said, "Just where I am going, little one." Then, seeing that the reply did not amuse the child, he held up his feather hands. "Ali," he said, "I would have thrashed that old father-in-law, but my hands are bound." On a charge of murderous assault, Rahman was sentenced to some years' imprisonment. Time passed away, and he was not remembered. The accustomed work in the accustomed place was ours, and the thought of one's free mountaineer spending his years in prison seldom or never occurred to us. Even my little-hearted Minnie, I am ashamed to say, forgot her old friend. New companions filled her life. As she grew older, she spent more of her time with girls. So much time indeed did she spend with them that she came no more, as she used to do, to her father's room. I was scarcely on speaking terms with her. Years had passed away. It was once more autumn, and we had made arrangements for our Minnie's marriage. It was to take place during the Puja holidays. With Durga returning to Kailash, the light of our home also was to depart to her husband's house and leave her father's in the shadow. The morning was bright. After the rains, there was a sense of evolution in the air, and the sun rays looked like pure gold. So bright were they that they gave a beautiful radiance even to the sordid brick walls of our Calcutta lanes. Since early dawn, today the wedding pipes had been sounding, and at each beat of my own heart throb, the well of the tune, Bhairavi, seemed to intensify my pain at the approaching separation. My Minnie was to be married tonight. From early morning, noise and bustle had pervaded the house. In the courtyard, the canopy had to be slung on its bamboo poles. The chandeliers with their tinkling sound must be hung in each room and veranda. There was no end of hurry and excitement. I was sitting in my study, looking through the accounts, when someone entered, saluting respectfully, and stood before me. It was Rahman, the kabuliwallah. At first I did not recognize him. He had no beard, nor the long hair, nor the same vigor that he used to have, but he smiled, and I knew him again. "When did you come, Rahman?" I asked him. "Last evening," he said. "I was released from jail." The words struck harsh upon my ears. I had never before talked with one who had wounded this fellow, and my heart shrank within itself when I realized this, for I felt that one day would have been better omen had he not turned up. "There are ceremonies going on," I said, "and I am busy. Could you perhaps come another day?" At once he turned to go, but as he reached the door, he hesitated and said, "May I not see the little one, sir, for a moment?" It was his belief that Minnie was still the same. He had pictured her running to him as she used, calling, "Oh, Kabuliwala, Kabuliwala." He had imagined too that they would laugh and talk together just as of old. In fact, in memory of her former days, he had bought, carefully wrapped up in the paper, a few almonds and resin and grapes, obtained somehow from a countryman, for his own little fund was dispersed. I said again, "There is a ceremony in the house, and you will not be able to see anyone today." The man's face fell. He looked wistfully at me for a moment, said good morning, and went out. I felt little sorry and would have called him back, but I found he was returning of his own accord. He came close up to me, holding over his offering, and said, "I bought these few things, sir, for the little one. Will you give them to her?" I took them and was going to pay him, but he caught my hand and said, "You are very kind, sir. Keep me in your recollection. Do not offer me money. You have a little girl. I too have one like her in my own home. I think of her and bring fruits to your child, not to make a profit myself." Saying this, he put his hand inside his big loose robe and brought out a small and dirty piece of paper. With a great care, he unfolded this and smoothed it out with both hands on my table. It bore the impression of a little hand, not a photograph, not a drawing, the impression of an ink smeared hand laid flat on the paper. This touch of his own little daughter had been always on his heart, as he had come years after year to Calcutta to sell his wares in the streets. Tears came to my eyes. I forgot that he was a poor Kabuli fruit seller, while I was, but no, what was I more than he? He also was a father. That impression of the hand of his little Parvati in her distant mountain home reminded me of my own little Minnie. I sent for Minnie immediately from the inner apartment. Many difficulties were raised, but I would not listen. Clad in the red silk of her wedding day, with a sandal paste on her forehead and adorned as a young bride, Minnie came and stood bashfully before me. The Kabuliwala looked a little staggered at the appreciation. He could not revive their old friendship. At last he smiled and said, "Little one, are you going to your father-in-law's house?" But Minnie now understood the meaning of the word father-in-law, and she could not reply to him as of old. She flushed up at the question and stood before him with her bride-like face turned down. I remember the day when the kabuliwallah and my Meenie had first met, and I felt sad. When she had gone, Rahman heaved a deep sigh and sat down on the floor. The idea had suddenly come to him that his daughter too must have grown in this long time, and that he would have to make friends with her anew. Assuredly, he would not find her as he used to know her, and besides, what might not have happened to her in these 8 years? The marriage pipe sounded, and the mild autumn streamed around us, but Rahman sat in the little Calcutta lane and saw before him the barren mountain of Afghanistan. I took out a bank note and gave it to him, saying, "Go back to your own daughter Rahman in your own country, and may the happiness of your meeting bring good fortune to my child." Having made this present, I had to curtail some of the festivities. I could not have the electric lights I had intended, nor the military band, and the ladies of the house were despondent at it. But to me the wedding feast was all the brighter for the thought that in distant land a long lost father met again with his only child. Do you like this Kabuliwala story? Then tell me in the comment box and subscribe our channel. Thanks for watching, guys.